what was the siren's call for you and Bill to, what siren did you hear to come to Oregon and to start planting grapes and things?
Well, it's hard to look back almost 40 years and analyze what seemed like a good idea at the time, but looking back seems totally crazy. We were two liberal arts graduates. We had no farming or business training. We chose to grow a grape, Pinot Noir, that had never done well in the United States. We decided to grow this grape in Oregon, which had no wine industry. I mean, the whole thing is so preposterous. The fact that we're still in business, that the second generation has taken over, that we're distributed internationally, it's a miracle. So what actually happened, and I described this in my book, is that it was Bill's idea, and it just sort of came out of nowhere. And when we started talking about it, the more we talked about it, the more interesting it was. And we decided that let's do this. And it was the kind of decision that you make when you're young and you don't know what you're getting into, and you're willing to risk everything, and you have energy, you're willing to substitute time for money. I look back and I think we had more guts than brains, and that we were in some ways part of the back to the land movement of the early 1970s, except that we had enough of the Puritan mentality that we couldn't just go back and join a commune. We had to start a business. We had to do something useful. So that's what we did.
So tell me a little bit about that back to the land mentality.
Well, that was a time when there were a lot of young urban professionals who were trying to, this was also the hippie movement, going back to the land, the simple life, et cetera, et cetera. And all of the early wine growers, we thought this was a unique idea, and we got here and we found out that there were a few other hardy couples who actually had the same idea we did. And we were a small band of comrades who joined together to help each other. And we met, the whole wine industry fit in any one of our living rooms, and we shared information, freely shared information, even though, we were ultimately going to be competitors. Where could we get a good deal on steaks? Where, what was the best way to keep deer out of the vineyard? What was the best spacing? What was the latest idea in trellising? All these things that we knew they were going to be different than California and Burgundy, and we needed to do a lot of experimentation, so we helped each other in that.
When you think back, that requires a lot of stamina. It requires a lot of energy. Where did all that come from?
We were young and crazy. And once you start something, you get it's like getting on a treadmill, and it's hard to get off. And we just kept going, and every time we come across an obstacle, and it was a challenge to see if we could overcome that. So we loved what we were doing.
Yeah.
It was those were exciting times, and we just put our nose to the grindstone and said, we're going to do this. We're going to make it happen, and if we run into problems, we're going to overcome them. So it was a way of testing ourselves as well.
So were you consciously going out and saying, hey, we're going to test ourselves, or
no,
it was just...
I look back and I think we were looking for a challenge that, would put us to the test.
Yeah, and it did.
It did.
What about, you mentioned the culture at that time. It's like there was a small group of people and you met in the living rooms and kind of shared, where to buy the cheapest steaks and that sort of thing. How's the culture today in the Oregon wine industry different or similar to the culture then?
Well, I think that the legacy of the first generation is to work together. that the united we stand kind of approach. And I think for the most part, the second generation is trying to carry that on. They're trying to work together, and I'm hopeful that that will continue, because I think that's a key element of success, that we need to work together rather than we can accomplish more by working together than we can in all-out competition.
Competition locally among like the growers here in Oregon.
Competition among the growers here in Oregon as we face the rest of the world. But I also think competition globally, that wineries have a lot to learn by working together, and I think that the Steamboat Conference on Pinot Noir is a good example of that. I'm sure you're familiar with that.
Yeah. A little bit more about like the cultures. Like, do you see the culture here in Oregon different than, say, I'll pick Napa? Or
well, you know, I only know what I've been involved with, and I think Napa because there's so much more money, there's a lot more glitz, and there's a lot more the people who are I'm struggling with how to put this, because one of the things about the wine business is that it has a glamour and a glitz that are on top of and apart from the passion for the land and the desire to make something from grapes that you grow that reflect the terroir. And I think that you find that latter more in Oregon. It's more pervasive in Oregon than it is in Napa. That in Napa, my sense is that the glitz and the glamour and the striving for wines that pull in big bucks dominates.
So it's a different kind of an attitude.
It's a slightly different attitude, yes.
I'm thinking, having grown up in Napa, I'm thinking, and it's changed so much. I used to pick grapes in like 1969, 68 in Napa. And when I was in the 7th grade, I used to pick prunes. And they pulled all those out. So what, like as your business grew to where it is today, when you look back, it's like, what would you say was like the single most, say, difficult moment for you in the whole business?
It's hard to pick just one.
Yeah. Well, maybe a couple then.
Well, I think the most difficult moment was in the late 1980s and just when we had a recession and we were borrowing from the bank and prime went up to 18%, and we were so heavily leveraged that it was just killing us. Financially, it was killing us. So that was a very difficult time. So that's one. The second is well, let's see. During the 1990s, when so many new wineries were coming in with a lot of money and raising the bar,
raising the bar in terms of
technology and facilities and experienced winemakers. So raising the bar in terms of professionalism, really, if you want to use one word. And we realized that we were getting left behind, and we needed
Left
to
behind in
compete.
what way?
That we had an outdated facility, that we had, we needed a winemaker with more skill. We needed to replant our vineyard. We needed better equipment.
Replant because like there was better varietals, or because of phylloxera?
Both.
Both.
We needed to plant more Pinot Noir, and we needed to deal with the phylloxera.
Uh-huh.
So I look at Sokol Blosser as having a renaissance in the late 1990s that has just now come to fruition.
That was in the late 90s.
Right. We hired a new winemaker in 98. You know, it started then. We built our barrel cellar, we got new equipment, we replanted the vineyards, and we're now seeing reaping the benefits of all of that.
You know, that kind of reminds me too. It's like when you made the barrel cellar, like it's, you know, you made it so it's LEED certified. Tell me a little bit about that thought process. It's like why do that? I mean, it's what's the
yes,
importance of that?
that's a good question. We realized we needed a new facility.
And this was in those 90s.
This was about 2000 that we
About 2000.
that we decided we needed a facility that would keep our barrels in a humidity and temperature controlled environment, which the existing winery, which is where the barrels were, was not doing.
Uh-huh.
So we had a quality issue that we were trying to address. And we looked at how we could do that in the existing facility, concluded, and this process took a few years. I think we started in 1999. Looked at how we could do it in the existing facility and concluded that we couldn't, and decided we were going to build something new. And we started out by hiring an architect who had had a lot of experience in wineries, but nothing in sustainable architecture.
Who is that?
Larry Farrar.
Uh-huh.
And we ended up switching to an architect, Sarah, S-E-R-A, that didn't have any experience in wineries, but was LEED certified and very experienced in sustainability. And because we decided, you know, we don't have the money to, I'm being just real honest here.
Oh, yeah,
we
absolutely.
don't have the money to make an architectural statement, but sustainability is one of our core values. We can make a sustainable. Let's see if we can do this sustainably. And that's why we went to an architect who had that technology that we didn't have. I mean, we knew about wineries. Now that put the pressure on our winemaker, on Russ Rosner, to work much more closely because he had to teach the architects. But he did, and we ended up with this great facility, which is doesn't have any or many architectural frills. In fact, there's no frills. But it was the first LEED certified winery building in the world, and that we were really proud of that.
Well,
and
it was the first.
It was the first, absolutely.
Wow. Huh.
And there have since been, you know, bigger and finer and all that kind of thing, but we were the first, so that was very exciting.
What year was that now?
2002.
2002. It amazes me that it took so long, you know, but I guess like that LEED certification is a relatively new thought process.
Right, it was relatively new at that point. But what took long was for us to decide exactly what, you know, to scale back to, we really looked at, because we wanted to the most sustainable thing was to modify what we had. And we looked very hard at trying to do that and finally decided we needed something new. We couldn't. And then we went through the process of designing with Larry Farrar and then stepped back again and started over with Sarah. So all this took a long time.
Yeah.
But sustainable practices, being good to the earth, is a core value for us, and our goal is sustainability across the operation. So we try to look at everything we do through this lens of what footprint are we leaving on the earth in how we farm, how we package, how we market, everything.
So now where does this value come from, like in you?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know where it comes from. It comes from my feeling about the earth and how humans are just part of the ecology, and it's the arrogance that we have had in trying to dominate nature is just repellent to me, and that we're part of the process, and we need to function as part of the process, and we need to not destroy other living beings in our pursuit of wealth and happiness.
Yeah.
So we're organically certified in the Vineyard. We're trying very hard to use recycle everything we can, recyclable labels, soy-based ink. We're so far from being sustainable even with all these efforts, but we keep trying.
Yeah. And so I'm wondering, that seems like that's a core value for Oregon, and I keep thinking, like, if you were doing your winery, let's say in California, just pick any one of the California, Santa Barbara, or any one of the California areas, I keep wondering, it's like if the attitude would be different.
I think it's no, I see wineries in California that have this attitude.
Yeah.
I mean, the mother lode of sustainability was Fetzer before it sold. And when we decided we were going to look at what we could do, we went down and visited Fetzer. They had this is before it sold to Brown Forman. They had a director of sustainability whose job it was to look at every part of the operation and see what they could do, and they were incredible. So it comes from the leader, and that leader could be anywhere.
Yeah.
So I would not say this is a core value of Oregon, although Oregon likes to market itself that way.
It certainly does, yeah.
And the Oregon Wine Board wants people to think that Oregon wineries are sustainability personified, and I have to say that maybe in relation to other places, Oregon wineries tend to be more sustainable, but I also, the more I get into sustainability, the more I realize how little people really understand it. So,
well, even the term sustainability,
it's a very difficult term.
And nebulous. It's like I talk to 5 different people and I ask them, well, what does that mean to you? And I get completely different stories. In fact, that's a good question to ask you. It's like, what is that sustainability?
Well, let me give you... I want to just show you something. I am on the board of an organization called The Natural Step, and sustainability is these 4 system conditions.
Okay.
And they have to do with protecting the environment and giving people equal access. This is a science-based framework for making decisions, and it's the path to sustainability. It actually is the program came from Sweden.
Would you mind if I photocopied this?
No, not at all.
Yeah, just so else I have to write it down.
Right. I may actually probably I have a printout of this that I can give you.
Okay.
But this is the definition. This is a science-based definition of sustainability.
Okay.
You know, you can give it a umbrella definition. Sustainability is acting today so that future generations will have the same quality of life. But that doesn't tell you anything specific about not taking natural resources out of the ground or not converting them into something that doesn't decompose. When you're talking about sustainability, you're talking about energy, you're talking about waste, you're talking about water and other natural resources.
Yeah.
So
this is more specific, like rather than a generalized kind of goal, watch your footprints kind of a goal.
Right.
Okay. When you look back, like in the Oregon wine history, what would you say? Like the five pivotal moments in Oregon wine history.
Well, it's interesting because I know if you're talking to David Lett, he would say the first one is when his wine, well. I'm going to compare this because he thought that was such a pivotal event, and it was for him. But the industry was so small at that point, there was no blip. However, in 1985, the International Wine Center in New York had the equivalent of the Pepsi Challenge, the taste-off between Burgundy and Oregon.
Uh-huh.
That was a real aha moment for the press and wine writers, because out of 20 or 30 Oregon Burgundian 1983 vintage that were blind tasted, the top 5 were all from Oregon.
The top 5 that the tasters chose as the top 5.
Right.
And the tasters were people like...
Well, they were wine writers, sommeliers, people who made their living tasting wine. It was all blind tasted. And what made this so significant is that wine clubs all around the United States recreated this tasting and came out with the same and we knew about this because they would call us and ask us for wine to put in the... Sokol Blosser had the top wine. So, they wanted to taste it and see. And this really made people sit up and say, wow. Then, unfortunately, we had a series of mediocre vintages, and so people tended to say this was just a blip. And we ended up having to rebuild after that. But that was a very significant event. The second would be the International Pinot Noir celebration that really started out. I was intimately involved in that. I was its first director for 3 or 4 years. Mm-hmm. It started out as a little economic development project and among the McMinnville Chamber of Commerce and some local growers, and we called ourselves the International Pinot Noir Celebration, which was really a laugh, but we grew into the name, and it became this world-class event that helped put Oregon on the map, even though it was a international event and we had international wineries. It was held in Oregon, and Oregon was the focus.
Yeah.
So that was another one.
Okay.
Oregon Pinot Camp would be a third. And I think Domaine Drouin locating in Oregon in 1988 was their first vintage.
Tell me a little bit.
Hugely significant.
In what way?
Because it was, Burgundy is the mother lode of Pinot Noir. So for a Burgundian to come locate in Oregon, and for him to say there are only two places, and for Robert Drouhin to say there's only two places in the world that would consider planting Pinot Noir, one is Burgundy and one is the Willamette Valley of Oregon, what credibility that gave us. So that was a huge credibility factor. It was a huge publicity factor for the Willamette Valley. So that was big.
Stepping back to Oregon, the Pinot Camp, tell me a little bit about what the Pinot Camp is.
Well, Oregon Pinot Camp is for trade only, and the idea is to bring the buyers, the frontline decision makers, and the top buyers to Oregon to see, to taste, to make converts out of them. Because we realized through the trade that came to the International Pinot Noir celebration that once we got them here, they were hooked. And so we decided to make a concerted effort to get buyers here. And the wineries joined together to fund this. I mean, here's a great example of working together to get buyers here who ultimately we compete for their attention, but it's in our interest, in all of our interest, to have them here. This has been a hugely successful event. And people, I don't know how many buyers we have over the past 6 or 7 years brought, but it has helped increase visibility and sales for Oregon Pinot Noir and other Oregon wines as well, because once they taste Pinot Noir, they say, "Gee, what else is Oregon doing?"
Yeah, at least they know where Oregon is on the map.
Right.
Yeah, I remember one of the things that you said in your book was that you had to take the map
right
to show, and it's like I travel a lot, and a lot of times I have to say. People say, "Oh, Oregon, where's Oregon?" Like in Africa or places like that. Well, in Africa, in the cities, they're pretty well educated, but some places I have to say, "Oh, yeah, it's just north of California."
People in the United States don't know where Oregon is. I would never expect anyone in Africa to know.
Some of the people in the cities are extremely well educated about geography and stuff in the United States. And stuff. Yeah, so it's pretty amazing. So let's see. So number 5. Pivotal historical moment in the Oregon wine industry.
Well, number 5 doesn't stand out to me as much as the others. I'd have to think about that.
Okay, so maybe it's only the top 4.
The top 4 is much easier.
Okay. What about like the role of women in the Oregon wine industry? And I don't know if we can distinguish between other places, but since this is a book about Oregon wine, tell me a little bit about
Well, I think the role of women has been critical. In the early days, it was couples. With the exception of Richard Summer, everybody else people in the Willamette Valley was all couples. The Letts, the Eras, the Campbells, the Ponzis, the Fullers.
The Corys, were they?
The Corys. They were a couple.
Yeah. Okay.
And while the project may have been the guy's idea, the women were critical to making it successful.
Critical in what way?
In labor, in support, in every way, really. I think people talked about what they were, what the best strategy was, what the best trellis system was. People were actively involved. I think that there were not, I may have been the only woman who ran a vineyard by myself, and did all the vineyard work. I don't think there were many women who did that, or who were responsible for the decision making. I think one of the differences is that a lot of the decision making was made by the men.
Mm-hmm.
So women were critical, but they were not dominant.
And so there was more of a supportive role.
More of a supportive role, more of a traditional role. Now, I think, and some, are on, it's a continuum, and there are some on the high side of that and some on the low side of that.
Yeah. Has that changed?
I think it has changed.
In what
I
way?
think the couples that are in it now are more equal in decision making, and I'm thinking of Annie and Scott Scholl, for example, Raptor Ridge. They would be a good example of the new face of Oregon because, they came from a high-tech industry. I think he was at Intel. He may still be at Intel. They're starting on a shoestring, which is what we did, so it's sort of the new generation. They've got kids who may come into the business. I don't know if they have investors. I don't know if it's wholly owned, but they would be the closest parallel that I can think of to what we did in the early days. And I think they are more equally... But I don't know. Virginia Fuller did so much, and Nancy Ponzi did so much, and Pat Campbell did. So it's hard to... It's just my sense that with the change in generations, that the newer generation has a more egalitarian stance, and the older generation was still coming out of that authoritarian, male-dominated role.
So that it's a broader cultural kind of thing that we're looking at here.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I have to ask you, because you have driven the tractor through the vineyard and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Is what has the vineyard taught you about life?
Well, I think getting out in the vineyard was a major, was a life-changing event for me.
In what way?
And I think, it's interesting, I could have lived my whole life in the city and never realized the connection to the land that I felt when I got out into the vineyard. And I think that's where I first realized how much that we were simply part of nature. And, the unity of all things and the connection between all things, and how we needed to work with that and be part of it and not simply crush it. So I see myself as, the vineyards are my passion. I'm a nature person. I'm not the winemaker. I never have been the winemaker. I have no desire to be the winemaker. I have tremendous respect for the winemaker.
Yeah.
Actually, I married the winemaker.
Well, it's a good marriage. I'm still looking at what the vineyard has taught you. It's it's we're part of nature. Don't crush nature. How is that different than, the quote hippie movement, that we came out of?
Well, I think it's a difference of maybe depth. The hippie movement was a little superficial, flower children and so forth, and it was, I'm trying to remember what, tune in, turn on kind of thing. And I think what I'm feeling is a real gut level, part of nature. You know, it's very hard to articulate because it's at the feeling level.
Yeah.
And I have tremendous awe for nature's renewal, and it's
renewal in terms of like seasons, or renewal in terms of like recovering from damage.
Both. The regenerative process that happens seasonally, that happens from damage, that it's a force that is just so awesome.
Yeah.
And I see it as amoral. Amoral meaning it's not tied into our standards of morality. It's got its own just regenerative force.
Yeah.
And it's just the beauty is incredible.
The beauty in terms of...
Well, and the actual process. I mean, you take a seed. How does that seed grow into beans? Or, you know, it has to have the whole idea of what happens in the seed.
Yeah.
What a miracle.
Yeah.
You know, so just all of that is what I like about it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's hard to capture in a soundbite.
Yeah, it is hard to capture, and you know, like that's one of my favorite questions. It's like I've asked that for a couple of people, and the answers are so fantastic. It's a phenomenal kind of thing. What about you know? It's like what in terms of like the vineyard. What makes Oregon Pinot or Oregon grapes different or special? I'll use the word special.
Well, I think of it in terms of everything coming together in just the right way.
And what are those things?
And it's not, you know, it's not just the slope of the land. It's not just the way the sun hits the hillside. It's not just the soil, the depth of the soil, the nutrients in the soil, the kind of soil. It's not just the climate. It's all these things coming together in the spot, the place, that make it just right.
Yeah.
Now, we're terribly concerned about global warming because, you know, if it gets much hotter, it's not going to be a wonderful place for Pinot Noir.
Yeah.
So, but we have, at this point, it's all those things happening, and that's the sense of place that terroir is, the taste of the place.
So when you, I'm trying to understand that just a little bit more from your perspective, like terroir, what that means. I guess I'll just ask you, what does that mean to you?
Well, terroir is really what I just said, all the different factors.
So that's like climate. It's like the fog. It's like the
right. It's everything. The way it comes
rain.
Together in that spot.
Indian summers, and our Jory and Willackenzie
right.
and Laurelwood soils, and
it would also be the other flora and fauna of that area.
Like.
Well, like what the big oaks that are around, and the native oaks, the big leaf maples, the lavender, the insects, the bees, everything that the whole little ecosystem. I mean, that's part of our goal is to develop this little ecosystem. The bluebirds, the swallows, they all have their place. They're all part of the terroir.
And so how do the bluebirds relate to the vineyard?
Well, they're voracious insect eaters. So we want to attract a lot of insects so that we have a balance. No one species is predominant, out of balance. And in order to help keep that balance, we encourage bluebirds and swallows that eat insects.
And so that's why the
bluebird
houses
boxes,
and
right.
stuff out there, yeah. Okay. Gotta check my notes here, make sure I'm covering everything. Oh, what would you say, and this is kind of a off left field kind of a question, what would you say is a really an unknown fact about Oregon wine?
Geez, you think there are any unknown facts? It seems
I don't know.
that we've managed to exploit every possibility. Well, nothing comes to mind right off. I can't think of, everything that has been possible to market, I think has been used.
Yeah.
So I don't have any unknown facts about Oregon wine, or something that I think people don't realize, for example. I can't think of anything.
Okay. I also do a bunch of calendars, and on those calendars, like this next year, is like what I'm doing is like I'm putting like unusual things that people don't think about, like how many grapes go into a glass of wine.
Oh, right, yeah.
Those kinds of things.
People ask that too.
Yeah. Well, how many grapes do go?
I have no idea.
Yeah. Well, I did like some mathematical
People have
calculations.
calculated it, right.
And some of the stuff I see out there is it's like they assume that you get 5 tons per acre. Well, I don't know many people around here that are trying for 5 tons per acre. More like 2 tons per acre. So that changes like the whole map of things. What else should I be asking you? Like for a book about Oregon wine.
Well, I can't think of anything. Those are pretty good questions that you came up with.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I really do appreciate your time.
Oh, well, you're very welcome.
Really appreciate it.